Welcome, everybody, to the Viper Pit, Episode 2. I'm joined here by Joe Higgins, Clary Stubbert, and Ronnie Miner. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Wonderful.
Very
So,
good. Thanks, Biden.
so to start off, we'll go by the order on my screen. So we'll go for each question. We'll go Joe, then Clary, then Ronnie. Sound good?
Yep, great.
Sure.
All right. So the first question I have for you guys is I just want to know each of your journeys into the sport of wheelchair basketball.
So my journey began in 1973 when I saw wheelchair basketball on TV on a local cable company in Edmonton. And I saw it on TV and I said to my mom, that's the game I want to play. And she called, she looked around and called a person named Gary McPherson, who was involved with the PSA back then. And then slowly got involved in playing the game, playing recreationally to begin with on Monday nights. And then shortly thereafter, the Alberta Northern Lights was formed, and the rest is history.
Awesome. That sounds, yeah, I've heard a lot about the Northern Lights actually, so that's pretty cool. What about you, Clary? What was your original journey like?
Actually, I didn't know about Joe starting in '73. That was my first year as well. I was in grade 12, coming out of high school, and I have spina bifida, but I had never used a wheelchair, but I was always involved in sporting clubs. I was the manager of every team going through school. And I was just shooting hoops one day, and a fellow in a wheelchair came over and said, have you ever played wheelchair basketball? And I said, well, no, I've never used a wheelchair. And so, well, you should come to a practice. I said, why would I use a wheelchair? That doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, I went to one practice, and that was all it took. And I didn't stop playing. I started out with the Nova Scotia Flying Wheels back in '73.
Awesome. And Ronnie, what about you?
Well, I was in a small town in southern Alberta and happened to see a wheelchair basketball game, and I think this was in 1975. And the Alberta team from Edmonton came down and was playing in Lethbridge, and I went out to Lethbridge and I saw it and kind of liked it, and in '76, I moved up to Edmonton and started playing.
Awesome. Well, yeah, all very different stories, but it really is true. You a lot of times as a young kid, especially being disabled, you know it's hard to find things to do that are physical, and the stories always amaze me. I didn't play basketball. I've got muscular dystrophy, so I can't shoot. But I played wheelchair hockey, and I just remember when I first discovered it. It's so liberating and just so cool to discover something. So those are definitely cool stories. And there's one thing that Chris from the Burlington Vipers and I couldn't find out. It was really hard to do a lot of research on the teams. We found out a lot about the Alberta Northern Lights, but it was a lot of the other teams were hard. So can you guys just tell me what the Alberta Northern Lights were and kind of what they did, like kind of like the history of the team?
So it's kind of an interesting development through wheelchair basketball because we all started as provincial wheelchair sports programming. And we are very fortunate to have people who had great vision to say that we wanted to be able to play wheelchair basketball and focus on wheelchair basketball more than once a year or twice a year with our programming. And a guy named Reg McClelland, who everybody knows if you've been involved in the sport, he was the guiding light behind putting the Alberta Northern Lights together, and then he inspired all of us to get involved, and he got a guy named Gary McPherson involved, and Gary took the sport to a whole different level as far as professionalism, as far as competition went. And then I think that's where, when you look at the NWBA and the Vancouver Cable Cars and some of the other programs across the country, they all went on a little bit of a different journey, but at the end of the day, they were all trying to play the sport more competitively.
Absolutely, yeah, that's pretty cool. What about you, Clary? What are your experiences with the team? Do you have any with the Alberta team at all?
Yeah, I had Joe laughing. A few experiences, some that we won't share here today, but some super memories. I started, as I said, playing in 73. 77 was my first year with the national team. I went to Stoke Mandeville, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but the year after that was Gold Cup, or 2 years after that, 79 I think it was Gold Cup in Alberta, or in Tampa, Florida. And I wanted to train with most of the national team at that time were either in Alberta playing with the Northern Lights or in Vancouver playing with the Cable Cars. And Gary McPherson and Reg both were very instrumental in having me move out there so to train with the national team and to play. And it was phenomenal. I mean, it's as close to professional wheelchair basketball as I will ever see in my lifetime. Now, with players, of course, can go to the States and get college scholarships to play wheelchair ball and so on. It's quite something. But back then, it was phenomenal. And really the only deal in Canada that I'm aware of that was traveling down into the Super League to play with teams in Nashville and LA, and we were all over the place. So it was a tremendous experience. So I was with the Lights, and I think I left in 82 or 83, and then came back again in 85 to train for the 86 Gold Cup in Melbourne. I was married at that time. My wife came with me too, and she worked and I played. So it was a phenomenal experience, a great organization. Still is.
From what I've heard, yeah, definitely. What about you, Ronnie? What are some of your memories with that?
Well, when I first came up in 1976, that's when the Northern Lights started. Joe and myself, we were like founding members of the Alberta Northern Lights, along with Reg McClellan. There's a few other people that were involved, and it was Reg's dream to play in Alberta and not have to go all the way to Vancouver to play. And so he played for the Cable Cars at that point. And so Reg started up the Alberta Northern Lights, and we were essentially started up to play in the NWBA. And with doing that, we got into the NWBA, and we were ranked, I think there was 147 teams, and that year we were ranked 146th. So we weren't last. But Reg and a guy by the name of Boots Cooper and Gary McPherson, you know, are some of the people. Now with the Northern Lights, we started in 76, and I believe Gary came on board in 1977 with the Northern Lights. And once he became the general manager of the Lights, we were funded by a group called PSA at the time, Paraplegic Sports Association here in Edmonton. And they kind of started us off. But it wasn't long with Gary's knowledge and expertise that we surpassed them, and we actually helped them out after a few years, because we surpassed them, and they had a tough time bringing in money, and we didn't at that time. So, but Northern Lights is by far one of the best set up organizations in Canada, and even in the world at that point in time, because we were kind of spoiled here in Edmonton, because we had those great individuals who went out and found the money for us and stuff, and we were able to go out and play, and that's really all we had to do is play. But a lot of us gave back to the organization, such as we worked hard at going out and speaking to groups and trying to get our name out there and stuff. And even the name itself, came from, I believe Joey Higgins and his, was it your uncle?
It was my uncle.
Yeah. And stuff came up with the name, and it kind of stuck, and because we kind of were wondering how we were going to or what name would be good for a wheelchair basketball team, and we went with that name, and we even produced a logo for it, and it was kind of an interesting logo, kind of busy, but I think I had a little bit of involvement in the logo itself, but we came up with something there, and we became a organization that was respected throughout the world in wheelchair basketball.
It's definitely an easy name to remember. Like, it's a clever name. I love it. I think it's very unique. You don't really hear names like that with sports teams. They're all kind of boring, to be honest. There's not very many exciting ones. And so, Clary, what can you tell me about some of the Atlantic Canadian teams? Because like I said, it's not that I couldn't find stuff on Alberta, but it was a little hard. Like, Google doesn't really have much about it. But what about Atlantic Canada? What can you tell me about the teams out there?
You're really going to test me here. I said, Chris, when he asked me to do this, I said, I have difficulty at best of times remembering what happened last week, let alone years ago. And I know that Ronnie and Joe can probably tell you every play of every game they've ever done. But as far as wheelchair ball in the Maritimes, in your intro, or when you were talking to us earlier, you said we were kind of the first guys on the scene. That wasn't the case. Walter Dan, Dennis Potty, David Rutherham, and Dave Morehouse, they were playing here in Nova Scotia for the Flying Wheels in Halifax, well before I came along the scene back into the 60s. And they had developed the sport quite well in there. They were doing demonstrations all the time and doing that kind of thing. But also there was teams in New Brunswick. Names are going to be names like Camille McGraw, Clarence Bastrash, people like that really had developed the sport. It was going quite well here. And in PEI, they were doing extremely well with just a house league. They didn't have a lot of people with disabilities playing sport, but those that did brought out all their friends, and they had a house league going when I moved there back in, I guess that would have been the late 80s, early 90s. That had 40, 50 people playing in the house league twice a week. So they had a really good program going at that time as well. So it was quite strong here in the Maritimes.
Definitely. That sounds pretty cool. And the last team I wanted to touch on was the Spitfires. So what can you guys tell me about them? Because they seem to be one of the top ones as well.
Who? Spitfires? Who?
So the cool thing was that we've been very fortunate in our country to have incredible leaders who took on the roles of being administrators of the sport. So Gary McPherson, Stan Strong, a guy named Michael Bryce were our guiding lights. Those three programs had those three individuals who never played wheelchair basketball, but set the table for us all to play. And the neat thing about the Spitfires was it was an integrated program of able-bodied and disabled players, and I think that's really was the connection that Alberta and the Spitfires had was how we embraced many people playing, and as Stubby just said, that was the way that we could all play the sport close to home. And the neat thing about the Spitfire also was the tournament in April every year was a must-go-to event. And we got to compete against teams from all over the world would come to this tournament every year. And Michael Bryce and his group put together an incredible organization of volunteers that allowed us to just go and play and embrace the game with everybody who shared the one common goal, which was compete and enjoy the game.
Awesome. Clary, what about you?
I think some of the highlights of it, if people were to ask me what the highlights of my career, along with national team play, would have been the Spitfire tournament. There's no question. Michael and as Joe mentioned, all the volunteers that you see year after year after year. Even as my career was kind of winding down, my daughter was playing at the time, and I took a bunch of kids from PEI every summer. It was a highlight of our summer. We'd go drive up that 20 hours and see some fantastic play and equal competition and just a great attitude towards the whole thing. And again, as Joe mentioned, Mike Bryce deserves all the congrats that we possibly get, and Bobby, his brother, also, who went on to coach the Canadian national team. So there was so many volunteers I could never begin to thank all of them. But it was a sad day when we heard that the tournament wasn't going to be anymore.
Yeah, that's Chris was actually like touting the tournament. He was very knowledgeable about that. He always self-deprecates himself and says, I lose track of all the names and stuff as well. But he said you guys would have a lot to say. And Ronnie, what about you? What can you tell me about the Spitfires?
Well, the Spitfire tournament was a really big tournament for everybody to go to, and they instigated a few different rules there, which was kind of fun at times. But that tournament is where we got found people like Jerry Tonello, and the thing that was so common that we had as Northern Lights in common with the Spitfires is that we integrated able-bodied people into our organization, and we actually had teams of able-bodied people playing, and so did the Spitfires. So we found it very easy to kind of relate with the Spitfires, and it was a must tournament to go to every year, even though and you had to play your best in order to win that tournament and stuff. And we even used the Spitfire tournament one time as a Canadian team, with the Canadian team to play to get ready for some games that I believe in 1986 that we actually played at the Spitfire Challenge as a Canadian team in order to get ready to go to Melbourne.
I'm glad you mentioned Jerry, Ronnie, because I remember specifically how terrifying it would be to see him coming at you with that tank of a chair that he used to use. And he was taking wheels out left, right, and center. He was just such a big, strong guy and so much talent. And of course, he went on to coach national team as well. Great basketball mind.
Yeah. The other unique time warp when it came to those tournaments was the involvement and evolution of different divisions of play, different types of teams. The women's program exploded during that period of the Spitfire Challenge because of how it was organized and also how it allowed you to play at the level that was appropriate to your skill. So whether you played in the 5th division or the top division, you were on your journey to play wheelchair basketball. And I I think it played a major role in the development of all of our great international players that would go on to win gold medals for Canada. They all got their foundation through those types of tournaments that were run in the Spitfire Challenge in Alberta and in other provinces across our country at that time.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And just moving on a bit, speaking of games and tournaments, what can you guys tell me about the Stoke Mandeville games? What, like, I know those were kind of a precursor to the Paralympics, and then they were kind of like alongside the Paralympics. Like, what can you tell me about those? Because that seems to be basically a founding of the Paralympics, right?
It definitely was. As a matter of fact, it was the founding of wheelchair basketball itself. I think it was the London Olympics where they had the first Paralympic event, which was just archery at that time as an exhibition. That Dr. Gutman, remember the name, that brought these out, knowing that people that were in hospitals coming out of the Second World War needed to have a place and still had that spirit in them, even though they might have had disabilities. And so they brought archery into that. And then after the years, all the other sports began to add. Joe, you probably have a better memory than I do in regards to the years, but I was lucky enough. I was in Stoke Mandeville 3 times, and all wonderful experiences as well. With my first international experience with Stoke.
The Paralympic movement has a rich history.
Yes.
But
That's okay.
Oops.
It was always driven by the caretakers of disabled sports, and Stoke Mandeville will always be the home and the beginning for many people, and it also pushed the evolution of the sport because not everybody was able to play at that point at Stoke Mandeville. So people like myself and Flua Kima and many other people with disabilities were not eligible to play in those competitions at the beginning. But as the sport evolved and as we went through our journey, we had different leaders that pushed for inclusion. And I think that's the wonderful thing about a multi-sport games that Stoke provided for all the athletes. And to this day, the stories that are told about Stoke Mandeville and what happened off the court is probably more valuable than what will ever happen on a basketball court, either back then or in the years to come.
I don't want to on Ron and Ronnie. I'm sorry, when you say multi-sport, it just brought it back. In '77, I played basketball, wheelchair volleyball. I did the 100 and the 1500, and I played table tennis. So all in one game. So you get to experience a whole lot of stuff before everybody started to separate and really find their specialties.
That's pretty cool. And Ronnie, what about you?
Well, my first time at Stoke Mandeville was in 1978, and I was a racer and a swimmer, and I didn't play basketball. Well, actually, I did in '78, but I went. I started out. I went there mainly as a track athlete, but at that point in time, they only had a 100-meter track there. So really, when you raced over there, you were only doing 100 meters, and my specialties were like 1500 and 800, and 100 wasn't really my thing. But I also did shot put, discus. I did the backstroke and the breaststroke, and I did weightlifting, and played volleyball. We played so many sports back then. The more you played, the more chance you had to be picked at that time for these competitions, because they weren't able to take a real big team, so they took a small team instead, and a team that could do multiple things.
Also good to
Definitely
mention,
very
all
interesting.
track events were all done in Everson Jennings wheelchairs with
Yeah.
breast welded on and a bar across the front. And, yeah. Got pictures of those.
I had a stainless.
Clayton, it's really important on a day like today when we're talking about the people who touched our lives, the people who are no longer with us, that when Clary said about the chairs, my first wheelchair came from Elaine L., who's now passed away. But she was one of the founding athletes for females, not only in Canada, but in the world. And the person who encouraged me to get into coaching and who was my idol when it came to somebody who embraced sport and employment and going to school was a person from the Maritimes, Diane Crow, who then became Diane Earl. And those two individuals changed my life because they gave me wheelchairs, they gave me opportunities. And I know that many of us have lost our dear friends that played on the Northern Lights or other teams, but we'll never forget the journey they took us on. And we're fortunate to be here today because of them.
Definitely. And it's good to remember people for what they did. It's obviously sad when they pass away, but remembering the good times and what they brought for disabled athletes. Like, I actually know both those names, so it shows how important of a figure they really are. And so obviously you guys have had experience with the national team as well. What are some of like your cherished memories? Maybe each of you can give me one or two from your time with the national team for Canada.
Boy, there's a lot. I mean, every team was very special, and there was a group of guys that were kind of the core group for the whole time on the national team from 77 to 86. And my time with Alberta training with those guys were mostly all national team players. My Paralympics is always the pinnacle. Very special. So 80 in Holland, and then 86, 84 rather. It got split up because the States kind of screwed up, I think. I don't know what the real reason for that was, but we ended up in England at Stoke Mandeville for those games. Those are really important. But then I think the highlight for me would have been we had a silver medal. My best performance in national team, that was in 86 in Melbourne, Australia. That was a great experience.
And we'll go, Joe. What about you? What are some memories you remember?
So I'm very fortunate, Clayton. The two things I've learned in wheelchair basketball: if you want to be a good player, surround yourself with great teammates, everybody better than you. And so my experience with the national team was I was good enough to get cut. And that's kind of a cool thing because I got to share the court with some of the greatest players to ever play the game. People like Roy Sherman and Stubby and Ronnie. Those guys pushed you every day in practice. So the day I got to try out for the national team and got cut, I knew I was not going to ever be good enough. And that was the day that I decided I should become a coach. And that leads me to my memory that I'll never forget. And that's 92, being an assistant coach under Tim Frick, leading Canada to its first ever gold medal in basketball, whether it be standing up or sitting down. The women's team, they had a dream. And we weren't the dream team back then. We were the team with the dream. And at the end of the day, we were the ones with gold medals around our neck. And I think the foundation that was laid in the 10 years before that gave wheelchair basketball in Canada at the high performance level an immense boost, because they found out that we could be the best. And over the next 30 years, they demonstrated that. The other thing that stands out to me when I look at being on a national team is some of the individuals who pushed and trained, who often wouldn't get to the Paralympics. They'd be the last cut or the second last cut, and price they paid to make their country great and to push the teammates and to put the country first was an amazing reason why we've had such a rich history, both with the men's program and the women's program. Because the one thing I know as a coach is, if you want to be a great coach, you better have great players. And we certainly have had great players over the last 30 years.
Definitely. And Tim Frick's teams were just phenomenal on that women's side. Like it blows me away, the accomplishments that he has. And Ronnie, what about you? What are some of your national team memories? I've heard you were a tough guy on the team, so I'm curious to hear your memories.
Well, tough. Well, maybe tough. Not too many people tested me, but there was a few times. There's so, I was on the national team for I think 13 years. So there's so many, because every tournament, everything is a little bit different and a little bit special, based on the players that were there or whatever. But one of my most memorable was Melbourne, because we had a team that went out there and we stuck together, and we were a team that, that did everything together. And with that, so for instance, we all decided we were going to go downtown and we're going to have a beer, right? So we all hop on the train, all 12 of us, and we're going on the train, and we go downtown Melbourne, and we go in, and the first guy buys a round and pays for it, and we go in one door and kind of drink up and out the other door, go to the next bar, and
high performance
and stuff. But we did everything, and it showed on the court, because we played so well together, and everybody there were such good friends, it seems, because there wasn't any cliques. It didn't seem on that team. On a lot of teams that I've played on, there have been little cliques, 4 guys over here and 4 guys over here. But that team, it just was, we all were in our rooms and we'd play 31 together. You remember that, Stubby? Playing 31, all 12 of us sitting on the floor playing 31 and stuff. And, and then on the court, we, nobody got upset at each other, like we all encouraged everybody. So it was such a good team, and that's why we won a silver medal there. And may I say that was the first medal that was won, I believe, by a Canadian team in wheelchair basketball. Yeah,
very cool. There wasn't very many medals, even lately, other than the Paralympics, that we have a joke in my family. The normal men in the Olympics just didn't seem to touch any of those Canadian Paralympic teams. And I'm curious, like, who are some of the top teams and players from other countries that you guys remember playing against that were tough competition?
The greatest league, I believe, that's ever been put together was the Challenge Cup. It had the 6 or 8 best teams in North America in the NWBA playing against each other, tournament after tournament. It showed great vision, and we got to play against generational players from the United States and Canada, and they are, when you talk about the greatest players to play the game back in that era, you're talking about Dave Kiley, Reggie Colton, Curtis Johnson, Roy Sherman, Peter Calistral, Terry Fox, Rick Hansen. They all played in that tournament. And for people coming from North America to have that kind of level of competition and that level of professionalism to organize tournaments and to have us travel North America like that, it's something that I think is very, very hard to describe to today's player when you talk about high performance sport back then.
Definitely. Clary, what about you? What are some teams and players you remember that were top level?
I know that France was always our for many years in the international competition. We always got knocked out in the round robin before we get to the semifinals by France. It seemed at least 3 tournaments. Remember, and I couldn't possibly put names on any of them, but Holland or the Netherlands had great teams back then. Israel, I could remember the name of. There's one guy in particular from Israel.
Yeah, I'll help you, Clary. High guy.
Yeah.
Philip Bay from France, and Koen Janssen from the Netherlands were
Australia's
phenomenal players.
Yeah, there were so many. But as Joe mentioned, the best competition that I think we ever did see was in that Super League we played in when I was playing with the Lights. It was incredible. Every game was a highlight.
And Ronnie, what about you? Any extras to add to that list?
Yeah, internationally we played Holland and the United States and Israel were the top teams at that point in time. High Guy was a phenomenal player. He was, in my mind, High Guy was the smartest player in wheelchair basketball that ever played. And he was just unflappable. And he used to do little things like he would go and he would be charging at a guy. And I never seen anybody go sideways before in wheelchair basketball, but he could. And all he would do is he would put a little bit of pressure on his front casters, lift up his back wheels, and shift over on his front casters. And he'd actually go sideways. So, like he was phenomenal and a good shooter. And he made sure everybody was doing what they were supposed to be doing. Other players that we played against, David Kiley, as Joe said, Curtis Bell, right? And one of the most underrated players in wheelchair basketball on the Cascalina Condors and on any other team, I think he would have been one of the best players is Al Campos.
Yeah.
Best defensive player you could play against.
Yeah.
He was incredible.
Yeah. And he didn't get a lot of the acolytes, but he should have. And then
big guy with the beard. Ed
Owens.
Ed Owens.
Yeah, incredible.
But there were so many big guys with beards.
Yeah, but
Guy from Fresno, David, what was his name?
David Everson.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about the big guy with the beard.
Ed Owens?
No. Dave. He was really tall, kind of a blob type of a guy, right, in a chair, but he could shoot and you couldn't move him anywhere, but he wasn't very fast.
And his name was, if he wasn't very fast, it couldn't be Ron Miner. So
No. But and then you had other teams, like the Arkansas team, the Razorbacks, who were always a pleasure to play and go there and with their coach, he came into our dressing room one night and said, "You goddamn Canadians, what the hell are you doing in our dressing room?"
Clayton, that brings that day is really important because I think that's the other thing that I think everyone here would agree is we're very fortunate to have been exposed to great athletes, both able-bodied and disabled, but also able-bodied coaching. So Phil Allen, Gary Smith was the person in that dressing room. We had won the privilege of being the home team in that tournament. And so we took the Arkansas dressing room, and their coach thought that they should still have it. And Gary didn't get upset very often, but Gary said under no circumstances were we leaving that dressing room. That was our dressing room for that tournament. And we were very fortunate to have people recognizing that if we were going to develop as wheelchair basketball players, we needed to be exposed to the best coaching that we could. And people like Gary McPherson put us in the conversation with Gary Smith, Brent Patterson, Bill Lyons, all those types of coaches that pushed the game.
For sure. Tim Frick talked about a lot of those coaches you just mentioned, and the one name that stuck out was Koen Janssen. Michael Frogley said that was one of the best players he ever saw. And he said the Dutch team was just so smart. They were very high basketball IQ, and he said they weren't necessarily the most skilled, but they outsmarted a lot of teams, which to me is the most fascinating part about sports is on paper you may be a better team, but it's all about how you play, and it really is fascinating to hear all your insights. And Joe, you seem to cover them for the names. You seem to know all the names. It's impressive.
I've been fortunate enough to stay involved through the whole process. And as a coach, you got to know who Koen Janssen is, otherwise you're going to lose the game. And I guess the beauty of the history is that there are names that only teammates know. So Jeff King, only teammates know who Jeff King is. But when you talk about somebody who helped us to be one as a team, it's a fella who used to play junior A hockey who got hurt and joined wheelchair basketball. And if you look at when people think, I don't know if that person can play the game, a name like Dan Gooderzan comes to mind. And nowadays, people in the world get to see a one-handed player from Argentina who's world class. But we got to practice with some really good teammates and some people who got the most out of their ability, who really pushed the game at practice. And I think that's really what made it so special for us to be part of that era.
Definitely seems cool. Just to add, like just for a little recap of all that is how do you feel the game has changed over the years, and are there any changes that you don't like that have happened in the sport?
Well, I think that in wheelchair basketball, when I first started, we started to do when you practice, you talked about lanes. You know, there are 3 lanes, and you go up and down those lanes. And now it's no longer a lane; you're going across court all the time, right? Instead of straight up and down, right? It gives you a little bit, makes the game a little faster, makes the game, you have to be in better shape to play the game now than you did back then. Although I think if I was in my prime, I would be able to play no matter what. You know, I would have been able, the game played today would have been made for my playing style, because I was a fairly strong pusher. So you're going sideline to sideline. So if you're doing that, I think I would have had a lot more layups than I did when I was playing.
Yeah, and Clary, what about you? What changes have you noticed over the years?
Well, equipment is always the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, we started playing 50-pound Everson Jennings chairs, you know, and now, of course, the titanium and the carbon fiber and all the rest of it has come along, and camera, and it's just changed the game entirely. But also, when it gets to the national, international level, the amount of dedication that athletes have. I mean, back then we certainly trained, but people had jobs and did other things. Now it's a full-time, if you want to be a national team and you want to stay at that level, it's got to be a real commitment, and you have to make a life change in order to follow through. That's why, and I think the biggest disappointment for me would be the recent call to not allow certain disabilities to play in the level, which is a disgrace. I don't know how they could possibly allow that to happen. So that's really disheartening. Especially in a Paralympic year, you know, and the first name that comes to my mind, and I know there's many other athletes, but David Ng, who's been, a 4 or 5-time Paralympian, who is now not all of a sudden eligible to play because of his leg length discrepancy is not quite enough. It's a centimeter or 2 off. Come on, you know, it blows my mind. There's no words. So that's really disappointing. But the availability of scholarships in the United States and the opportunities for anybody to play wheelchair basketball has increased, and that's really a plus. And inclusiveness is what we've been stressing here in Canada, and that's really important.
Yeah, no, before I get to Joe, that's one thing about David Ng is they make COVID happens and they delay the Paralympics, and then all of a sudden he's not allowed to play. Like it not only is it a disgrace, it's sad. I feel so bad for the poor guy, because like you say, 5 or 6-time Paralympian, and now all of a sudden you can't go. Like I just want to give the poor guy a hug, right? Like it's sad. And just Joe, what's your input? How do you feel the game has changed over the years?
So I look at it quite a bit different than those other 2 gentlemen. I really believe that some of the players were extremely skilled back then and could compete today because they competed at a very high speed with different equipment. But their ability to shoot foul shots, for anybody who watches this, try to shoot 88 out of 100 foul shots. And if you did, you tied Kevin Earl back in the 90s. And when you look at the development of the sport, I think there's things that we can learn from the past. One of them is we had great local leaders who made sure that we had local programming. and we had nationals. And when I look at playing province to province and the competition of nationals every year, and the Women's League of the 80s and 90s, when we had 7 women's teams playing regularly, I think Chantal Benoit could play in any era, and her athleticism would have and did span many eras of the game. When we talk about the players of today, I look at the commitment of a guy named Dave Duapo and how he was able to play on the national team for years and always have a job. And I think that's an awesome way to look at the sport. And that's when it comes down to looking at the game today, I think the biggest thing is the depth of talent. We've talked, today about 40 athletes or 3 or 4 or 8 good countries. I'm fortunate enough to coach today and been able to coach around the world. And there are 60 good wheelchair basketball programs in the men's team. And there are 20 highly skilled women's teams. And the depth wasn't there. But at the very top, I think Dave Kiley, Curtis Bell people could challenge themselves to be as good and dedicated as those players were. And they did it while having jobs and while working. And so I guess that's my different perspective as far as who we allow into the game. I would challenge each of us to play the game because we love it and because it's the #1 sport in the world. As the sport evolved, different athletes got to participate at different levels. And I am more concerned with making sure that we inspire the next one to continue to play, and that no matter what the challenges are in the classification argument, I believe the athletes and the coaches should be the primary caretakers of our game. And this is something that's really important, because for every person that didn't get classified into a Paralympic movement, the first 4 or 5 years that I played for the Alberta Northern Lights, I couldn't play nationally at our national championship. And for many years, people with cerebral palsy were not allowed to play, and we didn't fit the categories, and amputees were the same way. So we need to do a better job of recognizing not whether you fit into a category or not, but whether you're appropriate to play in a particular competition. And so that's the big challenge that faces our sport. And it's a lot more complicated because of the diversity of the nations that now play. And I think that's great testament to having somebody with cerebral palsy, spina bifida, and polio, and your disability, all discussing the sport and how we can make it better.
Definitely, and it's so cool to see. Well, that's about all I have for you guys. On behalf of the Burlington Vipers, thank you so much for taking the time today, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Clay.
Yeah, and we'll get a link out to you when it's posted. It should be up next Friday, so I'll send it out to you three. And Reg deserves to see it. He gets credit. And thanks again, Ronnie, for filling in for him.
Well, who could fill in for Reg? You know, He never did want to shoot or score. He just wanted to pass.
Clayton,
Yeah.
what you don't know about Ron is one of the greatest defensive players ever to play wheelchair basketball. If you want to, your Burlington group that watches this video, when they see Ron Miner, they should see one of the greatest defensive players that ever played the game, because he wasn't a class 2. He was the guy that would cover the best player on the other team, regardless of class. And when you look at, you call him Clary, we don't call him Clary. We call him Stubbert, we call him John, and we call him the best teammate you could play the sport with because of the way he came to practice. And when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, I was fortunate enough to be part of his induction. And the one thing I'll say about Johnny was he was the best practice teammate you could ever have, because when you thought you were tired, John said, well, let's do some more. And I think what he's done for the game in the Maritimes, after he retired as being a great player, he became a great ambassador of our game. And Gary would be really proud, John, because you did just like he did.
Wow. Okay. Checks in the mail, Joe. The best experience I ever had was with the Lights, and all the respect I think you can feel with just the three of us here. It goes to all of the other guys that we played with during those years as well. Great memories. And Joe was always my warm-up guy every game we played. So he worked me hard. I didn't do it on my own, that's for sure. Nobody did.
Yeah, and I can remember with Clary, him and I would rush up and down and do the killers and all of those things, and just try to beat each other all the time, you know.
Yeah.
And Clary got me a couple
as tough as any game I've ever played. It was like there was 110% every night by everybody. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's a perfect recap, guys. Thanks again, and we'll definitely stay in touch. I really enjoyed this.
Take care, Clyde. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a good one. Talk soon.
Hey, can you hang up and leave the three of us on so we can now tell the truth?
Unfortunately, I can't do that. You guys are on your own for that one.
Joe is my whipping boy.
Fantastic. All right, guys. Take it easy.
Later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.